All right, this was another really fun interview. Fritz Coleman is my guest. He was the former weatherman for the NBC affiliate in LA from 1982 to 2020. And if you didn't know, he's also been a comedian since before he was a weatherman. He's been on the Tonight Show 8 times. He has a new comedy special out now, free on Tubi. It's called Unassisted Living. We're going to talk about the new special, performing at the Comedy Store, his time in the Navy, and so much more. Stay tuned. Yeah, so usually it's most of this will be you talking and me listening, but I did want to start off and just talk about your story about what I've learned and what I find so interesting, because I'm really obsessed with, like, lately I've been obsessed with people's stories and like how they became successful. Yeah. And I think for yours it was like the theme that I'm picking up is that you were in the right place at the right time.
And I am the world's greatest example of that, my friend. You're exactly right.
Yeah, but also it's like you put yourself there. It wasn't like, you know what I mean? Like, you were in LA doing comedy and that led to the weatherman thing. Like, if you were trying to do stand-up in like Cleveland or something, it might not have worked out that way.
No, it was the confluence of preparation and timing. That's exactly what it was. I came out to LA in 1980 to do stand-up. I was working at the Comedy Store. I did open mics for a couple of years and finally got the position as a paid regular at the Comedy Store, which is the valued thing. And then in 1982, my friend that worked at NBC brought his boss and his boss's wife to see my show on a Friday night at the Comedy Store. And my background in broadcasting was Armed Forces Radio and Television. I was in the Navy for 4 years, and I did all kinds of things. And I told a couple of anecdotes on stage about being forced to do the weather in the Navy, but not knowing anything about it. But the Navy didn't seem to care as long as I filled the appropriate time and didn't use profanity, So after my show was over at the Comedy Store, my friend brought his boss and his boss's wife up to introduce me. And he said, I really loved your stories about doing the weather, but not knowing anything about it. Do you have any desire to come to NBC4 in Los Angeles and do some vacation relief fill-in for me? I need a guy to help me on weekends with weather. I need a guy to fill in for the main weather guy during the week because he needs a vacation. And I was making $25 a night at the Comedy Store. So after I caught my breath, I said, oh my God, when do you want me to start? And can I please carry your wife back to the car? Anything. Yeah. He said, well, and before we finished our conversation, I said, you did catch in the thing that I don't know anything about weather. He said, perfect. There's no weather in California. This will work out great. So I auditioned the following week. I got the job. I did the fill-in position, weekends and vacation relief for 2 years. Then my predecessor left, the main weather guy, Kevin O'Connell, who was the guy that took over Pat Sajak's job when Pat went to Wheel of Fortune. And I retired 2 weeks shy of my 40th anniversary. So I always say it's the greatest stroke of show business luck, other than that woman, Lana Turner, who was discovered at Schwab's Pharmacy in the 40s. I mean, and the older I get, the more I realize how lucky I've been. So
but again, yeah, I feel like you kind of put yourself in those situations, like even joining the Navy and getting that experience, like you took a chance on the Navy. Like it wasn't like it was a lifelong dream or something that.
Well, I didn't take a chance on the Navy. Here's what happened. I'm an old guy. And when I was going to college, they still had the draft.
Right.
And if you were failing miserably in college, and I passed that threshold by a mile, if you dropped below a C average in college, you got a notification from the Defense Department that we would like to chat with you, maybe for some future employment. So I had to go down and get a physical. And anybody during that time, this was in the late 60s, anybody at that time that got called up for the physical, you knew you were going to Vietnam. And so when I went down for my physical, I had a sense that I was headed for the Pacific. So I picked up my clothes. I went down the line of recruiters and immediately enlisted in the Navy for 4 years because I didn't mind serving my country. I just thought I could do it in a non-gun oriented way and be more productive, if you know what I mean. So I signed up for the Navy. The Navy gave me an opportunity to go to Armed Forces Television. Then I was in the radio business for 15 years. I was out of work one day after the Navy when I got a job at a radio station. I did that for 15 years. While I was in Buffalo, New York, I, as a DJ, was getting jobs hosting at various clubs around town. And I had an ongoing gig as an MC at a jazz club in Buffalo. And purely as my introductory remarks to begin every show, I began to write material for myself. And I got pretty good at it and got known for it around town, and then got smitten by the whole stand-up comedy career and came out here in 1980 to try it, because in those days, with Letterman and Jay Leno and Freddie Prinze and all those guys, the mecca for comedy was the Comedy Store. You had to come to the Comedy Store to be discovered. So I came out here, and that's how the whole thing started. So you're right. There's a line. I can easily trace the line now back through that series of decisions that I made, unconscious decisions. Maybe there really is divine intervention. I don't know, but
well, so when did you? Because you talk about in 80, you started kind of doing material, and then decided you wanted to try stand up. But when did you see George Carlin? Because you said that was like a religious experience, and that was a thing that said, "Oh wow, this is amazing."
Yeah. I had seen many stand-ups on television in short bursts, the 5-minute Carson, Merv Griffin performances or talk show performances. And so I was big fans of them then, but I never saw somebody do a full-on stage show. So when I was a junior in high school, my uncle gave me tickets to see George Carlin at an outdoor venue called the Valley Forge Music Fair, which was in suburban Philadelphia. East Coast cities in the summer would do these things called music fairs, where they put up a tent like a Circus Vargas or a Cirque du Soleil tent. And they were beautiful, tricked out venues that had like 3,000 seats in a rotating stage that was beautiful. So I went to see George Carlin. And I didn't understand the mechanics of stand-up, that writing an hour of stand-up takes a year, 2 years, 3 years, and you work it out in a modular fashion, a chunk at a time, and then you all put it together. But I didn't know how they did this. So George Carlin gets up on this stage, and for an hour and a half, talked what seemed to be extemporaneously, like he'd never thought of these words before, and convulsed this audience till they were in tears. And it was, as you say, a religious experience. I thought it was the greatest amount of power that another human being could have over a group of people, other than a TV evangelist who knows how to whip these people into, giving large amounts of money. But I was smitten by it. I never thought I could do it professionally, but it was a life-changing experience for me. And I think subconsciously, that's what drove me to do it in my own career later.
Okay, interesting. So when you signed up for the Navy and you didn't want to fight, do you have to tell them that? Like, how does that work? You just say, like,
no, they were happy to have me. I just went down the hall, signed up for the Navy. I didn't care why I was there. I didn't.
You get a choice. It's not like they say, well, you have.
No, what would happen is you'd get a physical, and then you sit around your house and wait to get that draft notice. Please report on November 30th. You're going to go to basic training. And then probably at that time in history, from 1968 through 1972 was the peak of the draft and the peak of drawing kids into the Vietnam War. And I just knew I was going to do it. I didn't believe in the Vietnam War. And I also knew that I just knew me. I would not be a good guy in the foxhole. I'm not the guy you want covering your ass when you're in the foxhole. I just thought, I'd love to serve my country. I love my country, but I think I could do it in a more productive way. And it was the best decision I ever made.
Yeah. So they're okay. If you tell them that's what you want to do, then
I didn't tell them. I just went down. I literally went down the hall and signed up for the Navy. I'm here to sign up. That's all. They didn't care why.
Okay. And then there happened to be an opening in the broadcast stuff or whatever.
Yes. I went to, the recruiter asks you for your 3 top choices of what you'd like to do.
Ah, okay.
So, and they do that for everybody. So my top choice was something in radio. Something I always wanted to try. So in the Defense Department's infinite wisdom, they sent me to radio repair school at Great Lakes. Oh. So I go to Great Lakes. I go to 8 weeks of radio school. And at the end of that experience, I was assigned to a ship, the USS John F. Kennedy, which was a brand new ship in Norfolk, Virginia. It was an aircraft carrier. Its responsibility was what they call the 6th Fleet, which was the Mediterranean, Europe, and all that stuff. And when I got on the ship, they were looking for volunteers for the public affairs department to run this television-based radio and TV station. In those days, they didn't have microwave. They had only had videotape. And so we would do radio shows and record newscasts, and then helicopters would take them to the tapes of those to the other ships in the flotilla. So you're learning broadcasting just in a real sort of primitive way.
Yeah.
So that's how I learned. And the beauty of that was that regardless of how bad you sucked, you would never get fired.
That's true. Yeah.
It was brilliant. It's, in most commercial radio jobs or elsewhere, you get a pass for 6 months, but if you're bad, you're out the door. In the Navy, you stay unless you literally violate the uniform code of military justice. You're in that job until you get out. So there was great freedom in being allowed to find myself and make mistakes and all that. So it was cool.
That's true. So it's interesting. So basically, you put your top choice, but they could have said, "Sorry, we're not doing that. You're in foxhole duty." They could have done that.
Well, in the Navy, you wouldn't get foxhole duty, but you could have been what's called a bosun mate, which is the guy that like greases the gears and paints the walls and all that kind of stuff. It was a great stroke of luck.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, because the Navy, because that'd be Army. So yeah, so you picked the right one. My dad was in the Air Force, so I think he picked a good one too. He was like he was a police guy in the Air Force. So
good for him.
Base. So yeah. Yeah, that's interesting.
Hey, we served our country. I say to my children, I have grandchildren now. I say to my kids, that my kids say to their friends, "Yeah, my dad was in the Navy for 4 years," and they go, "Why?" They didn't have any idea that there was no choice back then, and there's no sense of duty to the United States anymore. So, it's different now.
It's definitely, yeah. I mean, I was lucky. I grew up in the '90s. I mean, I think they had Iraq War and stuff, but the Middle East,
it was bad. Well, that was great. God bless the people that signed up to go to that.
Yeah.
But we
I don't think they didn't, I know I had to do the draft card, but I don't think they ever drafted anybody.
No. Now it's an all volunteer military. And the professionals in the military say it's better because you don't have somebody there against their will. And there's always going to be pushback and trying to teach somebody something if they don't want to be there. Now people want to do it because they can get out of their circumstances. The problem is there is a social and a racial component now, because a lot of the people that sign up are people that are trying to get out of their bad economic circumstances at home, so that the military gets weighted with a different, people that are in there for a different reason, but they want to be there, which is, that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, it's definitely my dad. I think that it helped him. I hear a lot of stories like yours where
where was your dad from?
Sounds like huh?
Where was your dad from?
Initially, we're all from Washington State. He grew up in Tacoma.
Oh,
Washington.
Was he a career military guy? Did he do a career in the Air Force?
No, he just did 4 years, and then he got. I think they still had the GI Bill back then. So
that was the brilliance of the whole experience. Yeah. I went to college for $3,000 a year because of the GI Bill. And I had a GI home.
So you dropped out, then you went to Navy, then you went back.
When I finished, I dropped out of school, finished the Navy. When I got out, I went to Temple University afterwards for 2 additional years.
Okay.
And the GI Bill was $3,000 a year, whereas now college can be $70,000 a year. And it's just insane. And I also had the ability, maybe your dad did this, to get a GI home loan, which is like a very low interest home loan. I never did that because honestly, I wasn't in a position to buy a house at that point. So
sure,
but I could have. It was a wonderful thing. And now if you do 4 or 6 years now, they'll pay for college. It's a great experience for people who have no other means.
Yeah. Well, yours was like great because I heard you talk about how you got to travel the world and you didn't have to fight and you got to see all this stuff.
My God. I had survivor's guilt at the end of the Vietnam War because I did 2 Sixth Fleet cruises, which are Mediterranean cruises, meaning when I went to Europe twice for 10 months at a time, and we went to Palma, Mallorca, Barcelona, Spain, Malta, Athens, Greece, Istanbul, Turkey, all these. I learned to ski in the Alps for free because I was in the Navy. I got to cover the Grand Prix at Monaco for Armed Forces Television for free. I had the most amazing experience. In the meantime, on the other side of the world, the war was going on. So, I mean, seriously, it would be impossible for me to calculate the amount of good luck I've had in my life.
Yeah. Well, so when you moved to LA and you said you worked at the Comedy Store open mic, how long did it take you to become a paid regular?
2 years,
2
2 years.
years?
And I worked there and I worked at the Improv and other small, bringer room, awful circumstances until you get good enough to be passed. And then I auditioned for Mitzi a couple of times. And the second time I did it, she passed me and gave me paid spots. I was getting 2 or 3 paid spots a week.
Yeah. So was Carlin ever there? Did you ever get to meet him?
Once in a while, I met George on a couple of occasions because when I worked at NBC, our news stage was right next to the Tonight Show. The Johnny Carson stage was stage 1. Ours was stage 10, a smaller stage right next door. So when George would go on there, I'd get on and shake his hand and, drool all over him like an idiot. And so I got to meet lots of people. Jay was there. I got there right at the end of the strike. There was a bad strike because up until about 1979, the comedians were not paid to perform in clubs in LA. The club owners were becoming millionaires, but their feeling was, we're giving you a stage and a spotlight in the entertainment capital of the world. This is like comedy college. We shouldn't pay. We're paying you in stage time so that the industry can recognize you and make you famous, which is BS.
Because that's
they're charging a cover charge and a 2-drink minimum, making a fortune and not paying their entertainment. And so these guys had to go on strike, and it got really ugly. I don't know if you've heard the stories about that strike was very nasty.
No, it's interesting. I had on this comedian Ted Alexandro. He opens up for Jim Gaffigan, and he's a New York guy, but he talked about how he got them to raise the pay at the Comedy Cellar because they're paying him like $15 or $20.
It's terrible. You can't even call it a tip.
And he said it was like that for they hadn't raised the rate for like 20 years. And so so he got him to raise it like, I don't know, $5 or $10. So I was like, that's really cool that you're, helping out your fellow comedians. I didn't know in LA that it was zero. That's crazy.
I'll tell you a great story about that. So anyway, just to put a cap on what I was telling you. So these guys had to go on strike. They finally struck. It finally got to the point where the club owners were paying the comedians $20, $25 a set. So you have 4 or 5 comics in the showroom a night, and they're being paid $20 a set. The owner's becoming a millionaire, and his entertainment costs for one night are like $300. Mm-hmm. It still was ridiculous, but it was the point. And the strike in LA culminated with a suicide. The building next to the Comedy Store was the Hyatt House, and a comedian by the name of Steve Lebetkin. He did have emotional problems, but he was so distraught because he couldn't work because of the strike. He jumped off the top of this building. And
I think I saw that in the Comedy Store documentary.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a great book about that time called I'm Dying Up Here, which that series was based on. It's really fascinating. It's not happy, but it's interesting if you're interested in the comedy world. So anyway, finally the club owners started paying the comics, paying for lack of a better term. And at the Improv, you would go down once a week or once every 2 weeks and pick up your checks at the box office. They would have them in a alphabetically sorted box in there. And I went down one time at the same time Jay Leno was picking up his checks. And I hadn't been down there in 3 or 4 weeks because I was doing the weather and I had to do the 11 o'clock news. And I didn't have time to drive down to Hollywood from Burbank and pick up my checks. So Jay's watching me. I got a whole stack of checks and he goes, "What are you not picking your checks up?" And I said, I can't get down here. And he got right up in my face. He said, "You pick those checks up because our comics had to go on strike. And there was a lot of heartache and pain and lost work because of that strike. You need to show them that this money's important, even if the $25 check is not important." And he was right. He was 1,000% correct. And I didn't pick up my check after that. It was really interesting.
Well, didn't Jay also tell you not to be a weatherman, that you needed to pick between comedy and weather?
He said I was very honored because he said the same thing to Seinfeld. He said, "Look, you're either a sitcom guy or you're a stand-up. You can't be both. You're either a weatherman or a stand-up. You can't be both." But I was both. I was doing the 5, 6, and 11 o'clock news at NBC in LA and doing 3 sets a week at the Comedy Store and the Improv. The only thing it did was keep me off the road, and I hated the road anyway.
And so you had to work clean. Is that partly because of that, or that just kind of the style you developed?
Well, it's truthfully my style. I'm not out to test the First Amendment, like some of these guys. But also in those days, when you had the talent coordinators from all the various talk shows, Carson, Merv Griffin, even Dinah Shore, some of these shows, just showing up in clubs and checking comics out, if they saw you working blue, you would drop way down their list of potentials. They wanted people who could work clean because they wanted to trust that they would be clean when they worked on the air. So comics in my era, Jay and Letterman and those guys all disciplined themselves to work clean, and I just never got over it. Now I'm at an age where, with this new comedy special I have, Unassisted Living on Tubi, my audience, which is baby boomers and older, won't put up with really raw material, and I don't want to do that. I honestly, God, I think we're in such a dark place in the world now. I don't do any current events material, pandemic stuff, but I don't mean political material, because I think people don't want to be reminded of how dark the world is. Just for an hour, lift them out of that space, give them some laughs, make them feel slightly better, give them a communal experience. And it doesn't have to require a lot of profanity or raw material. I just comment on stuff that, common experience, and that's it. And I've always disciplined myself to do that.
Yeah. Well, you did talk about in your special about how the kids, things are a little too safe, like the ground is rubber and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It is interesting how things have changed. Even since my time in the 80s and 90s, I feel like we've gotten a little more. I mean, we were able to run around, and I don't think but there's no cell phones. So our parents had no idea where we were.
Oh, no, I feel so bad. I have children and do you have children by any chance?
No, not yet.
It is such a hard time for kids to grow up now, because the threats are all right here. This sermon I preached to both my children and my grandchildren, we would go to school and there were always bullies and there were always beefs with kids in school. But when you got to Friday, you went home for the weekend, and that was a cooling off period. And by the time you came back to school on Monday, you've forgotten what the beef was. And, you would be friends again or not. But now threats and bullying and people's bad comments can come at you 24/7 all weekend through social media. And there's no chance to kind of escape that. And it's just a really hard time. And you see the way that, too much TikTok and too much social media is affecting kids. I'm not trying to be the old curmudgeon. I use social media too, but it's just a really hard time to teach kids how to sort the threats. And it's
I posted an article the other day. I read that kids are getting the depression rates in kids because of social media has skyrocketed.
Yeah, it's terrible.
The rise
it's a
of
hard
social
time. So yes, people have all those nostalgic things like the playground piece I did there. It's just all stuff that makes people smile about their own youth. And at the end of the thing, it's like they have a breath of fresh air. That's all I want to do. Honestly, I just want to entertain people for an hour. I don't want to test the First Amendment. I'm not trying to turn over some rock of some dark area that nobody ever thought of before. That's not what I do. But I think it's a great service, especially now. People just need the release. And talking about working clean, another thing that changed that, and this is after I was already sort of established in LA as a comic, then cable came along. And the rules loosened up, and you had Def Comedy Jam. And this isn't racist at all, but Def Comedy Jam really pushed the envelope with language and material and stuff. And then over time, when people would come to clubs, they would expect that kind of material because that's what they thought stand-up comedy was. And even when you would see specials on Comedy Central or Showtime or HBO, stuff was a little racier. So people would come to clubs. So those of us that were clean had a more difficult time, unless we went up at the beginning of the show, to get people's attention, because stuff got coarse. You know what I mean? It's an interesting time.
Oh, definitely. No, it's interesting now is that, oh God, I'm trying to think of what is the service? I forget. There's some service that has comedians that work clean. And it's like
the dry bar specials.
Yeah, dry bar. Yeah,
that's very successful. That's a great way to get your name out there.
Yeah. Because I've had a couple comedians that they got, this one guy, Andrew Rivers, he was a Seattle comedian, and he said, I work pretty clean. I guess, he's not religious, but he's like, I'll work clean and do the special. And it helped him a lot, I think.
No, it really did. They shoot that in Utah, and it's
Yeah.
a Mormon-based company,
Sure.
so they want you to work clean. And listen, you will always make more money in the long run in the marathon that is show business by working clean, because you can get corporate work, which is always the highest paying work. You're not going to make a lot of money working in a club unless you're a major star and you demand a certain pay base.
Right.
But if you work clean, you'll get corporate work because they can trust you. I mean, I have so many friends. I don't know if you've ever interviewed Don McMillan, who was recently a finalist, pardon me, on America's Got Talent. Squeaky clean. That guy has nothing but huge corporate paychecks coming in every month, because they can trust, when a corporate company invites you to their convention, they want you to not embarrass the company. So working clean always works in your favor. And
don't you think too, it's like, so you have to kind of be yourself. And for some people, like you said, maybe for you, that's just kind of who you are. But for other people,
1,000%. You have to be who you are. And if that's being a little edgier, I didn't grow up in an urban environment, on the streets of 164th Street in Harlem. So I can't do that poverty point of view. I'm just basically a boring white middle-class man. So that's what I comment on.
I can relate to your comedy, I guess.
I'm a Q-tip with glasses, man. And no, you're 100% right. You have to be real to who you are, because people can smell phony, points of view a mile away.
Absolutely. Well, you've probably seen, from the Comedy Store, you've been there since 1980. Do you still work at the Comedy Store now sometimes?
Once in a while, not often. I've gotten to the point now, because I've been in this marketplace for a long time, where I get invited to do after dinner speaking, which is basically my stand-up for an hour or 45 minutes. I do luncheons. I do some clubs. During the pandemic, I did a lot of work in Orange County, California, which is south of here. They weren't as restrictive about live audience venues during the pandemic, especially toward the end of the pandemic. So I've been working a lot down there. And so I just, because I've been doing it for so many years, get word of mouth invitation and stuff. So I don't do the clubs that often. If I have something I have to try out and want to hone it before I go, I'll go to Flappers, which is right down the street, and stuff like that, but not that often. When I go to, I'm so old that when I go to a club, I feel like a chaperone anymore. There's so many young, really funny people, and so it's.
But isn't that cool to be kind of the wiser older guy that can give advice and kind of mentor?
But no, that's not how you don't feel wiser. You just feel older when you go in there. That's all. But
really, people don't look up to you.
If my friend is doing an event, sometimes like a fundraiser, and they'll invite me to come, and I'll perform at a fundraiser, but just not that much.
Are you friends with a lot of big comedians?
Oh, a certain number. I had an odd combination of employment. I was doing the weather full time.
Right.
So I wasn't going on the road, which didn't make me sad at all. I was a middle act. I didn't have national fame. So as a middle, or what they call a feature act, you would be between the MC opener and the headliner for 20 minutes. You'd make $500 or $600 a week, sometimes have to pay your own transportation, and come home with $100 in your wallet. I couldn't do that. I had 2 children. Couldn't. So I had my job, but I was a weather guy. I stayed off the road. So I didn't have the bonding experience with all the circuit comics that many guys have. All the guys that worked in town, I became good friends with. Bob Saget and Louis Anderson, rest their souls, were friends, because we all worked around town. But so I have a moderate amount of, Jay Leno. I opened for him twice at the Geffen Theater in Los Angeles, and so
yeah, I saw, because you did my friend Adika's podcast, and Andrew Dice Clay called in. You guys
Dice,
know each other.
I know Dice was one of the guys that worked at the. As a matter of fact, before Sam Kinison passed away, I had a TV show that aired after Saturday Night Live in LA for a couple of years.
Is that the one, It's Fritz or whatever?
Yeah, man, I'm impressed. You've really done your homework, man.
Yeah, I think your stuff is fascinating. Your story is fascinating to me.
And so before he passed away, Mitzi Shore, who was the owner of the Comedy Store, and this was kind of an iconic tradition, she would write the list of performers out in longhand on a piece of paper and tape it to the door at the Comedy Store. So when customers came in, they would know who was working that night. And so Sam Kinison, a couple of months before he was killed in a car crash, came on my show and brought me a gift of one of these lists where it was Andrew Dice Clay, Howie Mandel, Fritz Coleman, closing out with Sam Kinison. Those are the days when they would have to close with Sam because nobody could follow him and he would clear the room out. People were so frightened of what they were seeing on stage, he would go out. But one of the great gifts. And so that was a great time. And the Dice character was really just one of the characters he did on stage. He did Al Pacino and he did Robert De Niro and all these kind of quasi-Italian Jewish characters. And the Dice was like the last one because it was the dirtiest one. And that was the one that got him the most amount of success. So somebody gave him the great advice to just blow it up and make the character the Dice Man, and the rest is history.
No, that's a great way. Yeah, there's so many stories that were started at the Comedy Store. I think one of my favorite comedians, which it's still just hate that these comedians die, but Norm Macdonald.
Oh,
you
man.
have these stories of him. Like I find it. I think his humor is so unique. I think people either love him or hate him. I think everything he does, every interview he does, is so funny.
Oh yeah, he's very brave and very subtle. He doesn't slam it in your face, and it's like he's letting his subconscious speak for him. I love Norm, and the heroism of Norm Macdonald was nobody knew how sick he was. He just kind of kept it to himself, which is really sad.
Yeah. What about Robin Williams? Did you see him perform? Like
I opened for Robin one time by accident. They have a Comedy Store in La Jolla, California, which is south of LA. It was kind of their satellite club, and it was run by Sandy, who is Mitzi's daughter. And I was down there, and at the beginning of my career, when you do these road gigs, and that was a road gig really, you are the MC and you're the opening act. So I was down there, and the headliner that night was Bruce Babyman Baum, who had, I don't know if you know Bruce, he had props. And
I do, because I just mentioned him. Somebody mentioned him on a YouTube comment, and I had to Google it. And he has a mustache, right?
A mustache. He wore a diaper on stage. He was just a heavy.
He kind of looked like what's that guy with the guy that smashed Gallagher?
Yeah. Unfortunately, he didn't have quite the fame that Gallagher had. But anyway, so we're starting the show, and Sandy calls me over to the booth and says, "Please don't announce this from the stage, but Robin's down here doing a concert at UC San Diego. And when he's done doing his concert, he's going to come up here and do a guest set after Bruce is done." Bruce was the headliner. I said, cool. So I got to, essentially open for Robin and then announce that he was here. And the brilliance of Robin Williams was, Bruce Baum is a prop comic. He's got a case full of props, and he's got bowling pins and masks and all kinds of crap. And then Robin comes up after Bruce's hour set and improvises another hour with Bruce's props that were as funny or funnier than what Bruce had just done. And I thought it was sad for Bruce, but it showed Robin's brilliance. He was really, there was an electrical charge in the room when he was performing.
It was so amazing. I mean, every time I'd see him in an interview or a stand-up, I mean, he would just, like when he's just riffing, I mean, you can tell, like,
he was always on. He never shut the brain down, which was part of his problem, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, because I know he did cocaine, but then he stopped doing cocaine, and I don't think he lost a step at all. I feel like he was just as funny.
He just did it faster when he was on cocaine.
Yeah, that's crazy. There must have been a lot of people like that you saw. Is there a lot of comedians you saw before they made it? And did you predict, like, oh, this guy's going to be a star?
Yes. Jim Carrey.
Yeah. Didn't you see his first performance when he was 16 or something?
He was 16. And he was, I think, next to Mike Binder, who was from Detroit, who did that documentary about the Comedy Store that you referenced earlier. He produced that documentary.
Yeah.
I think was the youngest guy ever to perform in the Comedy Store. Actually, Byron Allen was young. They were all 16, but 16 is young. You have no life experience. And to have the chutzpah to do it at that age. So he was down. He hadn't moved here yet, Jim Carrey. And he was down from Canada. He was working at clubs like Yuck Yucks in Toronto and all these various clubs. And came down, and he was working at the Comedy Store for like a week. And he was like an athlete stretching and warming up to go on stage backstage. You'd see him just going up and down the hall, burning off his nerves. And when he went on stage, he was so mesmerizing that everybody in the room stopped. I mean, when you get the busboys and the waitresses and the security staff to stop and pay attention to the stage, and you could hear a pin drop in that place when he would perform. And it wasn't always funny. Sometimes it was just a lovely, touching impersonation. When he did that on, I don't know if you know the pieces, he did an On Golden Pond where he puts the glasses on and pretends he's Henry Fonda. It'll bring tears to your eyes. You knew he was so talented as an actor and as a comic that somehow the world's going to make him a big star. You just knew immediately. Wow, and then I was at the Comedy Store the night that Whoopi Goldberg was auditioning for Steven Spielberg and Mike Nichols to do The Color Purple. So they got her in the main room. Her opening act was Bobcat Goldthwait, who I'd never seen before. Yeah, so one night I got to see Bobcat and see Whoopi do her one-person show with like George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, Mike Nichols in the audience. It was crazy. You were just plastered up against the wall, hoping to not move and call attention to yourself, watching this transpire in the main room at the Comedy Store. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I don't know if you know a comedian, but back in Seattle, I used to see this guy Fahim Anwar, and he moved to LA. He was like so young. He was like 19 when we'd see him, and he moved to LA. And he's a paid regular at the Comedy Store now. But I mean, it's just crazy how long it took him to get to be a paid regular, and then like he's just now like getting recognition. Now he's been on Joe Rogan and stuff. But it's like that's such a hard.
It takes, you know why there's so many comics, and part of that was born out of the period of time when I got out here, late 70s, early 80s, was this comedy club boom. There were as many comedy clubs in towns as there were Starbucks. Everybody was doing comedy because it's a relatively cheap form of entertainment. And so there were lots of them, and that bred a lot of comics in the local areas. And then they did what I did. They grew 10 minutes of material. They got a big head on their shoulders, and they came out here way before they should. And the town's filled with comics of all levels out here. So that's what happened. And it took them a long time, but you know what? If he's on Rogan, he's getting a lot of good exposure. Good for him.
Yeah. I mean, well, I don't know if you listened to the Dice interview on Rogan, but that was so fascinating to me. And Dice talked about how back in the day, the comedians were very competitive with each other. He said, now it's not like that. Everybody does everybody's podcasts and all this. Did you, what was your take on that? Do you agree with that? Were comedians very competitive back in the day? They would.
Yeah. Because of their basic, deep-seated black hole of emotional despair that they work from. Not all of them, but if a comic is on stage and does really well, you won't see the other comics laughing really hard. They'll be going, that's funny. They look on sort of with a combination of awe and jealousy because it's so hard and we're sort of lonely, needy people. And it's not like, hey, we're all a team here. Let's go. If you make it, I'll make it. And that's not what happens. But I felt like people were very competitive. They always wanted to be the closer. And but there were friends because I mean there were guys, I never had this experience, guys like Leno and Tom Dreesen that slept in their car when they moved out here. So their camaraderie, that their group of friends, and they would all go to Cantor's Deli at night and buy one another meals because that was survival for them. I never had to go through that, but they are a jealous group.
That's interesting. Yeah, I love hearing those stories of people like, sleeping in their car and stuff, and then they make it. And it's just like it's a happy ending. It's great.
Yeah. And then you're working for survival, and survival is a great energy to get good as fast as you can.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Byron Allen, and explain this whole thing. So you had that show, It's Fritz, and it was going well. And then they used Byron Allen because he syndicated, right? So it's cheaper or something.
It was the start. I don't even know who else in the business does it. But we did a show, a late night show that came on for an hour after Saturday Night Live on Saturday night. And it killed in the ratings. I mean, it sometimes got greater ratings than our 11 o'clock news did. And it was just a kind of a real primitive talk show. I'd come out and do a monologue and we'd have guests. And We gave lots of comedians their first appearance on television. Adam Sandler's first appearance on television was on our show. We had this cool thing that we did where we would have a comedian come on, and if he had a great piece of material, we would have him flesh that out into a skit using 3 or 4 actors. And the brilliance of that was we knew the bit killed because the punchline always worked, and we let him flesh it out into a 5 or 8 minute piece of material. Also, we're in LA, where a lot of the recording industry is now before it moved to Nashville. And there were record companies like Warner Brothers and Elektra and all these right across the street from NBC that wanted to get some of their young bands TV exposure, and they could have tape on them to get them to the next level of fame and television. So they would book these bands on there. We had amazing bands, these some of the first alternative bands, Dramarama, Mary's Danish. Our band was made out of, that we had every week, was made up of session players that were in town just on breaks from gigs. We had Phil Chen, who was Rod Stewart's bassist. We had Bruce Gary, who was the drummer for the Knack, My Sharona. Our keyboardist was Bonnie Raitt's keyboardist. The leader of our band, the lead guitarist, was Lawrence Juber, who was the guitarist for Paul McCartney and Wings. This was our band. And they only came on because it was cool and it was in town and it wasn't about the money for them. So we had this show, and about 2 years in, my boss came to me and said, I got to draw your show to a close. I mean, this show in TV terms cost nothing. It was like $30,000 or $40,000 a week, which was not hard to make back in advertising. He said, but Byron Allen came. Byron Allen bought the rights to Late Night at the Apollo or something, and said, he's going to offer me his show for free as long as we will put 2 30-second forward spots, one in the first half hour, one in the second half hour. And it's an offer I can't refuse. I'm sorry, it's business. That has nothing to do with you. And it broke my heart, but I thought, well, what a smart guy. And that's how he's got this Comics Unleashed thing and Funny You Should Ask. These are all shows that are done sort of on a barter basis like that.
And that's interesting.
And then, I don't know if you remember when Letterman was still following the Tonight Show on Channel 4, they syndicated his show on A&E, that's channel A&E channel.
Right.
And they would play his old ones during the day. And A&E approached us about doing the same thing. The problem is we didn't have enough shows to syndicate. We only had like 35 shows, and you had to have 60 shows to syndicate. So we missed an opportunity to do that. But so Byron Allen's business model is what blew us out of business.
Yeah, I think because Seattle had a similar thing. We had a show called Almost Live that was right before Saturday Night Live. It was like a half an hour sketch comedy show like Saturday Night Live. It was super popular in Seattle. And then one day it just went off the air. I bet it was a similar kind of thing. I bet it was.
Could be. Yeah, I mean, the business has changed so much.
Yeah. Well, tell me, I know you got to get going here, but I wanted to ask you about the Anchorman. You were kind of like a consultant on that. And you had this lunch with the director and the writer, and they said that there was some stuff. You told all these stories about, was it Paul Moyer? Is that the LA Anchorman?
It was a couple of people, but
okay,
Paul was one of them. Yeah.
But they said that there was so much stuff that some of the stuff you told them they couldn't use. It was so bad.
You've really done your homework. Judd Apatow I've known for years.
Yeah.
He used to be an MC at the Improv before he went and wrote for the Larry Sanders Show. And Adam McKay, who directed that movie, and I went to the same high school. So these guys invited me out to lunch at an Italian restaurant right down the street. They said, we just want to ask you a question about anchor people you've worked with. And it turned out to be like a 3-hour lunch. And they were in tears. I told them some stuff. Anchors are quirky people. And they're as egotistical or more than Tom Cruise, than any
wow.
show business person you can meet, because the system creates that mythology. I always say egos expand to the space they're given, and they're kowtowed to, and I mean, there's stuff, some of these guys had worked with somebody for 20 years and didn't know their name, like anchor people and the below the line people. And they had terrible table manners and stuff. And I just rolled off these stories. And at the end of the day, they said, well, we appreciate your time. These things are so ridiculous that if we put these in a movie, nobody's going to believe they're true. And And the thing about Ron Burgundy was it was just enough of this quirky guy where he was like one step removed from Ted Knight, where you could believe that guy would be a schlub exactly like that. But they gave me a credit at the end of the movie, which was nice.
Yeah. So when you saw that movie, you're like, oh, this is funny. You could relate to that.
Oh, yeah. No, that movie made me laugh really hard. The gang fight between all the anchor teams, including and the public television guys show up with their pipes. I was on the floor. It was
was it like that in the business? Were you competitive with the other?
No, I mean, comedy always comes from truth plus multiple exaggerations. But it was very competitive. Oh, yeah. The ratings the ratings battle is a real deal.
Did you ever see the other stations and give them? I mean, you must have. Well, not because you're.
Well, that's the odd thing about LA. The market is so big that people say, "Hey, do all you weathermen get together and have beers and stuff?" Say, "No, we see each other once a year at the Emmy Awards or something." But it's so spread out. It's a horizontal city that you don't get to know. You just go in the air and do it, and thank God you're employed. That's all you care about.
Absolutely. Well, I know you got to get going. Do you want to give a mention to your podcast, the Media Path podcast?
Yeah, we have Media Path Podcast, and you can go to mediapathpodcast.com. It's our website. We have all of our previous episodes there. I have a new comedy special, 1 hour on Tubi. Tubi's a free streaming service, advertiser supported. We just dropped it. We're having a lot of fun with it. And I appreciate the chance to talk about it. It was a great conversation. You really have done your homework better than anybody I've ever been on with.
Okay, well, thank you. That's good to hear. And then I always end promoting a charity. I think you've worked with some charities in the past.
Yes, I'm on the board. Part of my retirement is I'm on the board of 3 nonprofit organizations. One is the Children's Burn Foundation that pays for the treatment and the transportation of families for young burn victims all over the world. We even have kids coming from the Ukraine war, from the war in Syria, from Afghanistan, Iraq. Kids, even with minor burn victims in the United States, come here. But many times these burns require 15 or 20 surgeries. So to bring a family from a foreign country to the United States to stay a couple of years to put their child through this hell is expensive. So we raise money to help them with that. And I'm on the board of a group called Shelter Partnership, which fights homelessness. It's a great part of my life.
Oh, that's great. I'll put those links in the show notes.
Please do.
I forget if you have a website. Do you have a website?
I do. FritzColemanComedy.com.
Okay, perfect. I'll put that in the show notes as well. Yeah, your specials out, the podcast, anything else?
No, I really appreciate the chance to talk about it. Thank you so much, Joe.
Okay, thank you. It was a lot of fun. We'll talk to you later.
All right, my friend.
All right, bye, Fritz.
Bye-bye.
Fritz Coleman, what a legend. Make sure to check out his comedy special. Again, it's on Tubi. It's called Unassisted Living, and it's totally free. Check out his podcast called the Media Path Podcast. It's also free. And you can follow Fritz on social media to keep up with what he's doing. And I'm on there too. If anyone cares, it sure seems like social media is dead lately, but maybe I'm just not posting any good content. So anyways, I'm on everything: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all that stuff. And I know Fritz is on a couple of those as well. So follow both of us if you want. I've got some really exciting guests lined up, and I hope to have more scheduled soon. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great rest of your day and shoot for the moon.